Chapter 30 Spellbreaker Part 2. As Rainbow predicted, it didn't take much longer until we found the remaining captives. As indistinct voices began to fill the otherwise silent air, we slowed our progress down to a creep. The trees gave way to a small field of wild grass, and a cage stood tall in the middle. Much like last time, it was guarded by wolves, though this time only 2. While we technically had a numbers advantage over them, it was no argument that Fluttershy and I wouldn't really be able to pull our weight if push came to shove. All the same, Rainbow didn't appear disturbed at the odds. As we tried to devise a plan, she kept making remarks of finally getting the opportunity for payback. Constantly, my eyes flicked back to the cage of captives while we schemed. The moon was well beneath the tree line, and I couldn't make out the shapes inside. My ears strained to pick out the distant voices, but our hushed tones droned them out, so much that I feared the wolves would hear. In the end, we agreed upon a plan that, in retrospect, probably had better alternatives, and as I walked through the knee-high wild grass, I couldn't help but think of them all. Impatience drove me to hastily agree, though, and when the wolves locked their eyes on me, I knew it was too late to back out. I held my arms out wide, flashing the hatchet in my right hand and beckoning the wolves to come. They let out a low, threatening snarl. Sweat dripped down my back. Past them, voices shouted out in protest, warning me of the danger. One of them was all too familiar, and I forced myself not to break away from my role to call back to her. The wolves broke into a sprint, charging me head-on. I tensed, and instinct had me bring my hatchet closer to my body, just in case. 2 orange hind legs shot out from beneath the cover of the wild grass, striking the wolf on the left clean and beneath the jaw. Its companion didn't notice it tumble into the weeds, and made it a few more yards before being tackled by a blue blur with a pair of wings. I released the breath I was subconsciously holding, but the thrashing in the grass ahead where Rainbow ambushed her prey told me that we were still far from safe. She was straddled across the beast's back as I came up to them. Her hooves were locked tightly around its neck and foreleg.
Ain't so tough when you're getting ambushed, huh?
She challenged through grit teeth. The Timberwolf barked out a harsh retort and thrashed, trying to escape, but its eyes were pinned on me. With its free leg, it lashed out. Wooden claws raked at the empty air in between us. When it became clear that it couldn't overpower the Pegasus, it gathered its energy for one final ear-piercing howl. The hair on my neck stood on end. Without a second thought, I planted my right foot over its muzzle, ignoring the blistering pain the wounds gave. I got low and reared back with my hatchet.
Watch your foot!
Rainbow Dash barely pulled away in time for the blade to sink into the wolf's gullet, and the howling quickly died to a slow gurgle. As she pushed herself away from the body, she began to protest.
Hey! I had that one handled!
I found that I was out of breath when I tried to respond. I handled it faster. Carefully, I stood back up, fighting off the wave of exhaustion. The voices from the cage called out to us, most of them to cheer. Between them all, one lured me closer. I limped past Applejack, who was admiring her handiwork as Lyra called out.
Hunter! Hunter, over here!
From the mass of 3 silhouettes, a hoof reached out through the bars. I collapsed to my knees before it and reached out, finding the rest of Lyra and pulling her into as much of a hug as I could manage through the bars. For a moment, I didn't even mind the repulsive magic in the bars that made my skin crawl. I didn't mind the ache that encompassed my body, and the outermost skin deep into my bones. It was like a burden had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Lyra squeezed me a little bit harder, and it all came rushing back.
Ow, 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 ow. Sorry.
A short breath hissed out from between my teeth as we pulled apart, but I couldn't help the faint giggle that came following soon after. As I struggled to make out her form from the rest of the ponies inside, her golden eyes widened as she examined my body.
Oh my god! Hunter!
She couldn't keep her shock hidden.
What happened to you?
I drew in a breath to answer, but after a moment of hesitation, I resigned with a bitter chuckle. I swear, if I have to explain what's happened to me one more time tonight... I shook my head, trying to find the right words. Honestly, I think I might just lose my mind. She didn't appear to appreciate the answer, or my humor. I'll tell you what, I stuttered. I'll break you out of there. We can all go home, sleep for the next day, and then I'll tell you what happened. Deal? Yeah, good luck with that. A stallion interjected off to the side. Our little reunion shattered. I suddenly remembered the grave situation we were all in.
We've been trying to escape for hours,
Emer said on the other side.
There's some kind of magic field around it.
We've tried everything, but it's completely unbreakable, the stallion added.
Well, lucky for y'all, we just so happen to have an ace in the hole.
Applejack's voice boasted as she trotted up to my side.
As it just so happens, Fluttershy, Rainbow, and I were all stuck just like you. And Hunter here managed to find us a way out. What? Really?
Lyra pressed with genuine intrigue. Her attention returned to me.
How did you manage that?
I held up a hand, trying to mentally prepare myself after Applejack's little pep talk. Hey, I already said, I reminded her. No more explaining until after I get some sleep. I gripped my hands around the bars to help stand back up. Already the magic was trying to repel me. Stowing my hatchet across my waist, I gripped two adjacent bars with my hands and leaned back. Glancing past them, I offered a quick warning. You all might want to stand back. They didn't need to be told a second time. As the occupants scuttled further back into the cage, I began to pull harder. That creeping numbness returned across my hands. Green sparks spat out between my fingers. Then, with a thunderous boom, I found myself once again with my back to the cold earth, sucking in a deep breath from the impact. With a groan, I rolled over and dropped the two pieces of wood still in my hand. There has got to be a better way of doing that. Ow! I wondered aloud in a wheezy voice. There was a hesitancy, similar to earlier, before the ponies fully understood what had happened. As realization spread, so did incredulous voices.
I can't believe it! Did you see that?
Did I see that? I was closer than you, Firefly. Their words were lined with laughter, and no sooner than when I fully sat up did Lyra race across to tackle me into a hug.
Hey, careful, remember? Ow!
I chastised. Lyra pulled back and started to stutter.
Right, sorry.
There was a tense pause when we stared at each other, broken quickly as we both flashed a joking smile. I pulled her back into a hug, wrapping my arms tightly around her back and ignoring the pain in my body as she did the same. A part of me realized it had been less than a day since we last saw each other, but as my chin nestled into the crook of her neck, it felt like it had been over a year. Oh my God, Lyra, I finally breathed out. I was worried sick about you.
Hold on, you were worried about me?
Lyra pulled away, holding me at a foreleg's length. This close, I could make out her incredulous smile as she shook her head.
I was out playing babysitter for a bunch of fools, and next thing I know, Zakora is tearing through town at the hayride, screaming her head off about timberwolves coming, and how you decided to fight them alone.
She punctuated the last word by jabbing a hoof against my chest.
I managed to find Noteworthy, and we got a few other ponies, too.
Her words trailed off as her eyes widened. Suddenly, she grabbed hold of my shoulders.
Oh my gosh, Noteworthy!
She cried out in dread.
We have to find him! That giant talking timberwolf came by hours ago and took him away! He could be anywhere. We can't just leave him.
Hey, he's okay. He's okay, I managed to say. Her questioning eyes begged for more information. Despite what I had said earlier, I took some time to explain where he was and the situation that had brought him. With each word, the fear slipped away from her eyes, and she offered a sigh of relief. Seeing her reaction, I could only shake my head. Lyra, you... What was the right way to say it? I appreciate it and all, but why did you two come out here? It was way too dangerous with all the wolves running around. She looked hurt, but a half-hearted smile and subtle shake of her head betrayed her true emotions.
Hunter, it could be the end of the world, and I swear I'd still be running after you. Now, you'll catch me off guard at first because you...
She prodded teasingly at my shoulder, chuckling as she spoke.
You are boneheaded enough to run into it head first. But once I come back to my senses, I'll always be right behind you. Just to make sure you're safe.
There was a hesitation, and she pushed against my shoulder again.
You're one of my friends, Hunter. It's just what friends do. Every pony?
We jumped with a start as Fluttershy's voice broke out over the crowd. All eyes fell on her, but she didn't seem to notice. Instead, her eyes were locked on the trees from where we came, and she held up a shaky hoof.
Look!
I followed her gaze, and along the edge of the trees where we were, 2 pairs of glowing yellow eyes glared back at us. The group froze. Without taking my eyes off them, I slowly guided Lyra behind me with a hand and reached for my hatchet.
Only 2?
Rainbow Dash scoffed.
Didn't they see what we just did to their last pair of buddies? If you jerks think you're gonna stand in the way of us getting back home, then I hope you brought a lot more than...
The final word barely broke a squeak.
That...
As she spoke, more and more eyes began to show between the trees. It became too many to count as they shifted along the outskirts of the field. Gradually, a cruel choir of low growls echoed throughout the trees. It sounded like the trees themselves were alive, and all with a primal hunger.
Every pony, group up!
Applejack barked.
Now!
We all scrambled together to the sound of her voice. My hatchet found itself back in my hand, but as I scanned the glowing eyes, I felt that it might as well have been an old stick. The pairs of eyes easily outnumbered us 2 to 1. One of the rescued stallions spoke what was on all of our minds. So, what's the plan, Applejack?
We stay together,
she answered. The shaking in her voice betrayed the bravery she was trying to force.
We ain't leaving no one behind. We'll get through this together.
Was she trying to convince herself or us? And then what? Rainbow sounded just as confused as her friend as she spoke up.
We can take them. Right, AJ?
Her voice was quiet in response, and it dropped a weight of dread on the group.
I don't know.
My mind was running wild. The stress from the group was reverberating within me, and I found myself looking desperately for any kind of escape. To fight would be a death sentence. No one would make it out alive. As more eyes populated in the dark, though, I noticed that they were all only on one side of the tree line. Turning briefly back, the trees behind us seemed to be clear. My stomach twisted at the thought of running, though. We were far from Ponyville, and I knew that way would only lead further. Even then, if we chose to run, if I gathered every last ounce of energy I had left, I knew I wouldn't make it far. The others would outrun me, the wolves would catch me, and then I became overwhelmed. In the blink of an eye, I found myself back in the haunted wagon, bracing to jump out against the two chasing wolves. The whole night had passed. Scratches and splinters and bashings and bites, and now I found myself here. I never left. The weight of the revelation dragged me to my knees. My hatchet slipped from my fingers and disappeared into the wild grass. At my side, Lyra distantly called my name. After all of that, I'm right back where I was, I whispered incredulously. Numb fingers ran through my disheveled hair. It's not fair.
After all you have been through, you complain that tonight isn't fair?
Hunter, it's going to be okay.
Lyra tried to assure me.
We'll figure something out. Some pony will come for us.
I winced as the voice made a sound that could have been a laugh. That damned headache was spreading through the back of my head, and it spoke clearly enough to pierce through the sound of my heart beating in my ears.
Fate has an odd way of imposing itself, doesn't it, Hunter?
Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up! My inner mantra didn't help.
You acted in defiance against our better judgment, and now fate offers you the same opportunity as before. To double down on your defiance, or face your demise.
I unscrewed my eyes, finding myself staring at the wild grass, shuddering against a faint breeze. The voice knew the turmoil raging in my mind. It always did. Something about its words was odd. You're not trying to talk me out of this, I thought aloud. Lyra, still next to me, overheard my words and mistook who they were meant for.
What? Talk you out of what?
Her hoof touched my shoulder.
What are you talking about, Hunter?
She pressed. There was an urgency in her tone.
What am I supposed to be talking you out of?
The voice, though, that familiar stranger, didn't respond immediately. I pressed for an answer. Why aren't you trying to talk me out of this? I demanded. Do you know something? A pained groan overcame me as the headache spread to the back of my eyes.
When was the last time you took our advice, Hunter?
It screamed in my head.
Ever since you've joined with the ponies, you've done nothing but argue with and challenge us. We who saved you from them in the first place.
The pain was still spreading. I fell on one of my hands to keep myself from collapsing, using the other to pinch my brow, as though that would help.
Look up, Hunter!
It demanded. Against my will, my eyes were pried open, and my head jerked towards the wolves.
Now, they outnumber us 3-1, yet still they stay. What reason would they have to not strike now?
I struggled to latch onto a thought between my own shallow breaths. Lyra spoke once more, but her words were drowned beneath the beating drum in my ears. My eyes forcibly scanned the tree line, and the conclusion finally came. They're waiting on someone. And as I said it, I knew the answer to the next question. Thorn. The headache subsided, seemingly satisfied. Applejack's voice broke through the drums. What did you just say, Hunter? I looked to her, and then to all the others in the group. The fear in their eyes must have been reflected in mine. My body trembled on all fours, crying out against the plan my mind and the voice had agreed upon. Rainbow? My voice barely broke a whisper. I cleared my throat and called out louder. Rainbow, do you know how to get back to Ponyville from here? She hesitated.
I should, yeah. But we won't be able to go far with all those timberwolves in the way.
My stomach was wrenched. I fought back the acid rising in my throat. A part of me wished she would have said otherwise. Just one reason not to go through with this again.
Hey!
Lyra grabbed my shoulder, pulling my attention to her. Her golden eyes were wild, and I found myself sad that was all I could make out of her in the shadows.
What are you planning?
She demanded.
Come on! You know you can talk to me!
I leaned back to sit on my knees, staring to try and take in as much as I could. My hand reached out, grabbing across her back and pulling her in for one last embrace. Her body shook with mine. Now it was my heart that cried out to stay. If nothing else, then for her. But I knew what would happen to both of us if I chose to. I just wanted to say. The words caught in my throat. Her hooves cautiously wrapped around me. Thank you, I whispered, just loud enough for her alone to hear. My eyes danced erratically past her mane, trying not to focus on the other pony's stares. Thank you for everything. I don't think I would have made it this far without you. As I tried to pull away, Lyra's grip tightened, and the temptation to stay was unbearable. My hands found their way to her shoulders, and I managed to push her back. Our eyes locked. Through the faint glimmer of tears pooling in her eyes, I knew she realized what my plan was. I tried to sport a smile, unsure of how it actually turned out. Try not to be right behind me this time, okay? I begged her. Before she had the chance to respond, I grabbed my hatchet out of the weeds and stood back to my feet. The eyes of the ponies threatened to anchor me in place as I rose, but with every ounce of energy I had left, I broke into a sprint to the tree line opposite of the wolves. Come on, you mutts! I shouted at the top of my lungs. To my back, familiar voices shouted in protest, and wolves cried out a sharp howl. Between my own footfalls, the sound of hooves stampeded after me, stopping only after I broke into the trees. No screams followed after, a small comfort I found while navigating through the shadows of the forest. My body was running off of pure adrenaline, and my quick, shallow breathing tried to feed it as best as it could. My heart beat its deafening drum to an erratic cadence in my ears, all but drowning out the rabid calls of the wolves as they quickly gained on me. My eyes searched desperately for any sign of obstacles along the forest floor, knowing that any trip would spell a quick demise. The pain in my body was slowly replaced with a numbness, threatening to collapse me from exertion. I tried not to dwell on the fact that I was utterly lost. Each weave through the trees, every random turn, was a hope to buy myself just one more second of life. The breath of the wolves was hot on my heels. If I paused even for a breath of my own, it would be my last. With one last turn, the shadows of the trees broke away, and I found myself at the edge of a large clearing. My feet didn't miss their stride, though, and they carried me through the seemingly empty terrain. The sounds of my pursuers faded as I crossed it, and my body found that it could take no more. I tried to push on just a little bit further as my eyes danced across the small details they could find. One last stand. I tried to reason with myself. Just need to get into the middle where I can see them coming. I'll take at least one of them out with me. The thought lingered in my mind as I ran, and the inevitability crashed through. Oh God, I'm going to die. As I finished the thought, my body was struck by a great force without warning. I fell on my back, and my body shook as finality settled in. Vertigo caught up with me. I rolled to my side in time to retch what little was left in my stomach, spitting out the leftover acid as my body shuddered. I braced for the wolves to fall on me, but their teeth didn't come. I dared to steal a glance around me for an answer. Much like before, the wolves waited patiently among the trees, staring hungrily at me, but this time they were spread evenly around. As I stared, a question burned in my head. What had hit me? It was like I had run into a brick wall. I struggled to stand back up. All around, the wolves sang out in their scratching growl. My white-knuckled grip never released from my hatchet, and I held it close. There was still no sign of my attacker. Where could it be? The grass here wasn't tall enough to hide one of the wolves. I backed up further into the center, making it only a few steps until a pressure formed against my back. Spinning around, I found myself faced with nothing but thin air and the eyes of wolves far on the other side of the clearing. What had stopped me?
Do it.
I winced as the voice echoed in my head like a large bell. Hesitantly, I held out a hand and took one step forward. Pressure built up against my hand. The air wrapped around my fingers. It was hard, yet soft as fabric.
Do it. Do it.
Memories sparked to life. Memories from a life that felt so long ago. My eyes widened. It couldn't be.
Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it.
My arm lashed out against my will, raking the hatchet through the air to the impatient mantra of the voice. Reality tore at the edge of my blade, and a brilliant light erupted before my eyes. All around, the wolves let out a pained howl. I staggered back from the blinding light. My free hand raised to shield my eyes, and I permitted one to open to see through the cracks of my fingers. The air was torn like fabric. In between, a maelstrom of colors roiled. Bright flashes of light arced out like small bolts of lightning, connecting to the ground before dissipating. My eyes now adjusted. I let my hand fall to take it in its entirety. All the doubts before were nowhere to be found. It was the portal home. I blinked, and the surprise faded. My body was rejuvenated with the promise of only having to take a few more steps. With eyes wide in wonder, I took one step forward, then another. A new force tackled me from the side, and the world went spinning. My left shoulder connected to the ground. Feeling a weight still against my right, I lashed out on instinct. The wolf's momentum helped carry it off of me, and I rolled across my shoulders. My heels struck the earth. On the other end of my feet, the Timberwolf landed. I scrambled to stand, and the large, moss-ridden wolf rose with a low growl. "Thorn," I growled in return. Something was boiling within me. The headache had returned, demanding my attention. I tried to push it out of the way as I motioned to the portal with my hatchet. "This night's gone on long enough, Thorn!" I shouted with a hoarse voice. "My home's just on the other side! Just let me leave! You'll never have to deal with me again!" He reached out with a claw and dug it into the earth, dragging himself closer with a menacing slowness. Only thanks to the light given off from the portal could I make out his features. The left of his face was scorched. The eye had become dull compared to its counterpart. "If only I hadn't heard this bargain before," he said, voice dripping with murderous intent. "I just might have considered letting you live." He lunged, and my body moved of its own accord, pulled as though by strings. I leaned back, pivoting along my good foot as Thorn lifted from the ground. My hatchet swung wide with my body, intercepting him along the way. The edge didn't connect. The hatchet was twisted in my grip as it connected, and its blunt face connected to Thorn's partway through his strike. The wolf was deflected away, and he landed between myself and the portal. We both regained our balance in time to stare each other down. Overhead, thunder rolled. A quick glance showed that the stars were winking out of sight. Clouds were forming overhead. Odd. There hadn't been even one in sight before. My body lurched back on its own as Thorn lunged once more. His jaws snapped at the empty air between us. My eyes danced between the wolf and the portal, and my mind raced for another bargain. "Oh, come on, Thorn," I panted. "Here? There? A few feet into my own home. What does it matter to you where I die? I'll be a dead man walking the moment I pass through. I deserve the right to die in my own world. The difference is my satisfaction," the wolf snarled, fresh sap bleeding from the scorched half of his face. He skulked forward once more, and with each step he took, I matched one back. "You've already tainted that town with your existence," he said, spitting out the word as though it were poison. "Even should you go now, the question will haunt their minds. Where did it come from?" His voice rose with each word, and his jaws snapped at my feet in punctuation. "They shall search for the answers to past sins best left forgotten!" Thorn lunged once more, and it felt as though a light bulb had burst within my head. With it, a flame ignited, throwing me back as it ravaged my mind. I was a passenger in my own body, desperately clinging to anything that would anchor me to reality. Against my own will, I brought the head of my hatchet against the palm of my left hand, blade outward. I focused on the cold of the metal head, watching helpless as the stranger took control. As Thorn's underside came exposed, my body pushed the head of the hatchet outward. This time, it met its mark. The blade dug itself into his ribs. Thorn released a pained howl, just for a moment before opening his maw and burying his teeth into my left shoulder. I wanted to scream, but the stranger wouldn't permit it. Through the pain, I lost my anchor and found myself thrown into a storm of images. Throughout the chaos, the voice spoke in clarity.
"If you seek to bury your sins, we shall dig a grave for you.
Numbly, I felt a pressure release from the inferno across my shoulder. A response was growled.
So the beast shows its true face.
I clung to the words, fighting through the storm until a singular image came clearly. Thorn's face was inches from mine. His dull, wounded eye was just to my left. Something was pelting against my body. When had it started raining? My voice spoke without consent. Ours shall be the last which you see. My right foot planted itself ahead. I found that Thorn's wiry body was grappling against mine. My left foot pushed forward. The old wolf was losing his purchase. He pulled back a claw and buried it into my side. As each sharpened hook dug into my flesh through my shirt, my mind threatened to lose its anchor yet again. Behind him, the portal was becoming erratic. The arcs of lightning were more frequent than before. It singed the wild grass around it, leaving nothing but the fresh scent of ozone in its wake. Suddenly, I found myself wishing nothing more than to back away from the one passage back home, but my body pressed forward nevertheless. My hand pushed into the hatchet's blade lodged into Thorn's ribs once, twice, 3 times, each time forcing it deeper. Thorn howled once more, staggering further back towards the portal on his hind legs. I was only a few steps away now. A rush coursed through my body, shared between myself and the stranger. We were going home. Enough! Thorn's other paw planted against my right shoulder, and with a sudden burst of strength, he pushed me away. It was startling how far back I stumbled. My feet struggled to regain their balance, and on the 3rd pace back, I slipped in mud freshly made. My back struck against the cold, wet earth as rain pelted on me from above. The mud clung to my sore body, anchoring it down. It offered a tempting lie of rest, and I found myself struggling to stand back up.
On one thing, we do agree, human.
Thorn's berating voice was distant.
This night has gone on long enough, and I shall remedy that now.
Pushing against the mud, I rolled to my side to get a better look at him. My hatchet was still buried across his chest. Against the backlight of the portal, the Timberwolf's exhaustion showed. Pained tremors shook his wireframe body. His maw was agape, pushing out a heavy fog in the rain with each breath. I expected him to charge, but instead he turned to the portal. Raising himself to balance on his hind legs, he gripped his claws around the lips of the portal. They glowed in a sickly yellow color.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
I demanded, repeating it once more louder over the sound of the storm.
This night has opened my eyes!
Thorn bellowed. His outstretched forelegs gradually began to close, bringing the edges of the portal with them. Ice ran through my veins. He was closing the portal.
For too long I've kept my claws in the way, holding open the broken window-turned door. Tonight I will do what was meant to be done.
My mind went reeling as panic took hold of my heart. A renewed sense of urgency took over. I scrambled to get back to my feet, cursing at each second wasted with each slip. Without a second thought, I charged, tackling Thorn from behind. Each hand grabbed at a foreleg, and I pushed against him. He tried to shake me off, but I managed to stand my ground.
I don't know what you're trying to do, I hissed in his ear, but I'm not going to let it stop me.
We strained against each other, but no one could gain the advantage. The portal churned just inches ahead of us, seemingly impatient from the fight. Overhead, the storm began to rage, mirroring the chaos beneath.
You are a fool!
Thorn screamed, the thin desperation lining his voice further. "You don't know the powers you're meddling with! And I don't care!" I shouted back. "I'm going home, Thorn! One way or another!" Gradually, his claws began to part, opening the portal by another inch. "And there's nothing you can do about it!" A rogue bolt of energy arced from the portal, and Thorn's body grew hot against mine as it carved a path along him. He howled in pain. All around us, the wolves echoed the cry. With an agonized gasp, his body fell limp against mine. The resistance suddenly stopped, and my hands forced his claws apart as far as I could reach. The portal's dimensions followed. I staggered back from shock with Thorn's body in my arms. His neck rolled back against the fresh bite he had made on my shoulder. He took in one final wheeze of a breath, and his words trembled into my ear. "My queen, they never returned." "Hunter!" a voice shouted from above. My eyes shot skyward. Between the flashes of lightning, a silhouette could be seen. A crackling noise drew my attention back to the ground. The portal was moving wildly. The air around it began to shudder. All I could think of was the princess's poor timing. From within the portal, there was a violent flash and a thunderous crack, and my body was thrust away. I struck the earth, and then once more, and the world plunged into darkness. I found myself slipping in and out of consciousness. With each awakening, I found myself center in a world of tormenting pain. My eyes would flutter open to a black sky. Cold droplets of water rained down like arrows, piercing my body. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even so much as twitch, without sending an inferno through my already tortured nerves. Above, a face appeared to blot out the sky. Dark blue with lighter eyes, and nebulous hair glistening like stars. Though my mind felt scrambled, it was nevertheless familiar. A cough took over as I tried to speak, wreaking havoc inside my chest. Even after it left, the mind-numbing pain lingered, and each shallow breath I could manage after only fed it. The world faded as a comforting cold took over. When I woke again, 2 more faces hovered above. They were speaking, and somehow I knew they were all directed to me. Their words were distant, lost in the sharp ringing in my ears. One of them motioned to the others, Fluttershy. My eyes focused on something she held in her hooves. An awfully familiar bottle. The others moved. I tried to protest, but all that would come out was a pained groan. A hoof brushed against my face, igniting a new wave of festering pains. I traced it back to its owner, and Lyra met me with tear-streaked eyes. Her lips moved, and I could only so faintly hear her voice.
Come on, Hunter. Stay with us.
She pleaded. Her eyes scanned over my face, and I wondered briefly if it looked as bad as I felt.
Hang in there a bit longer for us. Please.
Behind me, Princess Luna wedged her hooves under my back and began to lift me out of the cold mud. Old wounds grew aggravated as my torso was forcibly curled upright. The pain was unbearable. My ragged breathing morphed into a screaming protest in a desperate attempt to channel it out. Why were they doing this to me? The question burned in my head as wet streaks scorched a path down the sides of my face. Why wouldn't they just let me rest? This night has gone on so long. I deserved the right to rest. Fluttershy pushed the end of the bottle against my lips, and a bitter liquid sloshed into the back of my mouth. I tried to cough it down, but she was persistent, closing my mouth as the last drop fell in. She wasn't trying to drown me, was she?
Come on, Hunter.
She cooed with a trembling voice. She pushed a smile that didn't match her frightened eyes.
How are you going to get any better if you don't take your medicine?
To save myself from choking, I forced myself to swallow. My body somehow found the energy to shudder once as the liquid slithered down my throat. I felt as though I was sinking. My eyes came out of focus, and I struggled to make sense of the world around me. Voices were arguing with incoherent words. I just wished it would all stop. A creeping numbness was spreading through my body, and I found it easy to slip into it, to hide from the pain. A deep sleep was beckoning for me, and I no longer had the strength to resist it. Consciousness faded, and Lyra's voice called after me in the dark.
Hunter?